My name is Evelyn Reed. I'm 68 years old, and just 3 weeks after burying my husband of 45 years, my own son called me a useless old woman and threw me out onto the street. Before I tell you how I discovered the $10 million secret my husband left behind to save me, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to know how far my story has traveled. It was raining that night. Not a gentle spring shower, but a cold, biting Manhattan rain that soaked through my thin coat in seconds. I stood on the glistening sidewalk, the city lights blurring through my tears, and watched the doorman struggle to pull my 2 worn suitcases under the building's awning. He wouldn't look at me. No one would. From the doorway of the penthouse I had called home for 2 decades, my son's wife, Tiffany, stood with her arms crossed. Her designer dress was immaculate, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. She looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her shoe. "Listen, Evelyn," she said, her voice as sharp and cold as the wind whipping down Park Avenue. "The penthouse is Ethan's now. The will was clear. You simply can't stay here anymore." My gaze shifted past her, searching for my son. Ethan stood behind her in the warm, golden light of the foyer, half hidden in the shadows. "Ethan, honey," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Where am I supposed to go? This is all I have left of your father." He finally stepped forward, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. At 42, he was the spitting image of his father, Richard, tall, handsome, always impeccably dressed. But where Richard's eyes held warmth and kindness, Ethan's were empty. A cold, hard gloss like polished stones. "You can stay with Aunt Carol for a while," he said, his voice flat. He might as well have been discussing a business transaction, a minor inconvenience in his day. "Or you can go to that trashy garage Dad left you." "Honestly, Mom, I don't really care." The words hit me like a physical blow. A trashy garage. My inheritance. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at this man, this boy I had raised, whose fevers I had soothed, whose dreams I had encouraged, and I didn't recognize him. "But why, Ethan? Why are you doing this?" He let out an exasperated sigh, a sound he usually reserved for slow waiters or bad stock market news. Tiffany placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, as if to steady him from the sheer burden of my presence. It was then he finally looked at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, a deep, chilling resentment. "Come on, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with a cruelty that felt so alien, so practiced. "You're just a useless old woman. What would you even do with a real inheritance? Dad knew that. He knew you couldn't handle it. A useless old woman." The phrase seemed to hang in the air, sucking all the sound out of the bustling city street. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me, and it came from my own child. My blood ran cold, then hot with a shame so profound it burned my cheeks. Tiffany's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. She took a step forward and gave my last remaining suitcase a deliberate shove with her expensive-looking boot. It toppled off the curb, landing with a soft splash in a grimy puddle of street water. "Problem solved," she chirped, turning back to Ethan. He didn't say another word. He just turned, and together they walked back inside. The final slam of the heavy oak door echoed in the street, a sound that marked the definitive end of my life as I knew it. The doorman, his face a mask of professional neutrality, finally looked at me with a flicker of pity before he too retreated inside, leaving me utterly alone. Numb. That's the only word for it. I was completely numb. I somehow managed to get my soaked luggage into the back of my old Buick, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the ignition. I drove away from the gleaming tower, away from the warm lights of my home, with no destination in mind. The windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm against the downpour, but they couldn't clear the image of my son's face from my mind. The words, his words, ricocheted around the empty car. "Useless. Old. Woman." I pulled over a few blocks away, the city's indifferent glow surrounding me. What had I done wrong? How had the loving boy I'd raised become this cold, callous stranger? My phone buzzed in my purse. Aunt Carol. I couldn't answer. I couldn't bear to tell her, to admit that my own son had thrown me out like garbage. My hand fumbled in my purse, searching for a tissue. Instead, my fingers brushed against a stiff paper envelope, the one from the lawyer's office. Inside, I knew, was the deed to the garage and a single large key. My inheritance. The punchline to a cruel joke. I pulled it out. The key was old, heavy, and rusted around the edges. It felt cold and pathetic in my hand. It was a symbol of my new reality, of my worthlessness. It was an insult. But as I stared at it, another thought surfaced, cutting through the fog of my grief and shame. It was an insult, but it was also the only thing in the entire world that was mine. My fingers tightened around the cold, unforgiving metal. My knuckles turned white. A fire I thought had been extinguished long ago began to smolder deep in my gut. He thought I was useless. He thought I was finished. He had left me with nothing but a piece of trash. Fine. I took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand, and put the car in drive. My mind reeled back 3 weeks to that sterile, quiet lawyer's office. The day my world first tilted off its axis. I remember the smell of old paper and expensive leather furniture in Mr. Davies' office. Richard had always trusted him, called him an old bulldog. I sat on a stiff leather chair that felt a mile wide, my black funeral dress feeling tight and foreign on my skin. Ethan sat beside me, checking his watch every few minutes, the picture of a busy, important man inconvenienced by grief. He had already been talking about liquidating some of his father's assets, about streamlining the portfolio. I thought it was just his way of coping, of taking control. I was so naive. Mr. Davies, a kind-faced man with tired eyes, cleared his throat and put on his reading glasses. "This is the last will and testament of Richard Allen Reed," he began, his voice soft but formal. My heart ached just hearing Richard's full name spoken aloud. He went through the usual legal jargon, words that floated past my ears without meaning. I just stared at a photo on the wall of Mr. Davies with his family, all of them smiling. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were. "To my beloved son Ethan Michael Reed," Mr. Davies' voice cut through my fog, "I bequeath our primary residence, the penthouse apartment at 740 Park Avenue, New York, New York, along with its contents." I felt a jolt like a small electric shock. Our home. Richard had left our home entirely to Ethan. I glanced at my son. A flicker of something, triumph, relief, passed over his face before he smoothed it back into a mask of solemnity. He reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture that was meant to look comforting but felt possessive. Mr. Davies continued, "Furthermore, I bequeath my primary investment portfolio, managed by Goldman Sachs, in its entirety to my son, Ethan Michael Reed." My breath hitched. That portfolio was Richard's life's work. It was our future, our security. It was everything. I felt a cold dread begin to seep into my bones. What was left for me? After 45 years of marriage, of building a life and a family together, what was my share? It came almost as an afterthought. Mr. Davies shuffled a page, peered over his glasses and said, "And to my beloved wife, Evelyn Reed, I bequeath the property located at 1420 Industrial Avenue in Queens, New York, the garage building and all of its contents." Silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. A garage. In an industrial part of Queens we hadn't set foot in for 30 years. I remembered Richard buying it ages ago for some business idea that never panned out. I thought he'd sold it. I looked from Mr. Davies to Ethan, expecting one of them to say it was a mistake, a misprint. Ethan just kept that placid, sorrowful look on his face, squeezing my hand a little tighter. That's all," I whispered, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. Mr. Davies looked deeply uncomfortable. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "That is the extent of the bequests, Evelyn. I am so sorry." But I saw something in his eyes then, a look I couldn't place. It was more than just pity. It was a flicker of something else, a message, a warning. I was too stunned, too heartbroken to decipher it. It was the first clue I missed. The rest of the meeting was a blur. I signed papers I didn't read. I nodded when I was supposed to nod. My mind was a roaring vacuum. A garage. While our son, already a wealthy man in his own right, inherited millions. It didn't make any sense. It felt like a betrayal from beyond the grave. As we were leaving, Ethan wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring for the benefit of Mr. Davies. "I'll make sure you're taken care of. You'll always have a home with me." The lie was so perfect, so convincing. Even I believed it. Mr. Davies handed me a large manila envelope. "Evelyn," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, intense moment. "Here are the deed and the key. Please, keep them somewhere safe." He pressed the envelope into my hand, and for a second, I thought he was trying to tell me something more. But then Ethan was guiding me out the door, and the moment was gone. That night, back in the penthouse, I sat in Richard's favorite armchair, clutching the envelope. The key inside felt heavy and useless, a cruel joke from the man I loved. I didn't understand. I tried to tell myself he must have had a reason, that his mind must have been failing at the end. It was the only explanation that didn't shatter my heart into a million pieces. I had no idea how wrong I was. I had no idea that the betrayal wasn't Richard's. It was the man sleeping in the next room, my son, who was already planning how to get rid of the useless old woman his father had left him to deal with. And I had no idea that the absurd rusty key in that envelope wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The drive to Queens felt like a journey to another planet. I left the glittering spires of Manhattan behind, crossing the bridge into a world of low-slung warehouses, chain-link fences, and empty rain-slicked streets. The GPS on my phone guided me down desolate avenues until it announced, "You have arrived." I parked my Buick across from the address, 1420 Industrial Avenue. It was even worse than I'd imagined. The building was a squat, windowless brick box, probably from the 1940s. The bricks were stained with decades of grime, and the large corrugated metal door was a patchwork of rust and faded graffiti. A single bare bulb over the door flickered weakly, casting long dancing shadows. This wasn't just a garage, it was a tomb. For a moment I just sat there, the car idling, the rain drumming on the roof. This was it. This was my inheritance. A wave of despair so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. Ethan was right. It was a piece of trash. I was a fool for even coming here. My hand hovered over the gear shift, ready to put the car in reverse and just go. Go where I didn't know. Just away from this final crushing humiliation. But then I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red and swollen. I saw the woman my son saw, old, defeated, useless. And a spark of defiance ignited in my chest. No, I would not run. This place, this horrible derelict place, was mine. I would face it. I turned off the engine, grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the rain. The key was big and cold in my hand. The lock on the door was an ancient, heavy-duty thing, and it was just as rusted as the door itself. I had to jam the key in with force. It wouldn't turn. I put my shoulder into it, grunting with effort, my coat soaked through, my fingers numb. Nothing. Tears of frustration welled in my eyes. It was all a cosmic joke. I was locked out of my own pathetic inheritance. "Come on, Richard." I sobbed, half in anger, half in grief. "Don't do this to me." I gave the key one last, desperate twist with all my remaining strength. There was a hideous, grinding screech of metal on metal, and then a loud, satisfying clunk. It was unlocked. The door was incredibly heavy. I had to lean my whole body against it, pushing until my muscles screamed. It moved inch by painful inch, groaning in protest, until there was an opening just wide enough for me to slip through. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a nervous path through the pitch-black darkness. I braced myself for the smell of damp, decay, and rats. But the air, it was different. It was cool, dry, and clean. It smelled faintly of something I couldn't place, wax maybe, and clean oil. I swept the light across the floor. It wasn't cracked concrete. It was smooth, sealed, and spotlessly clean. This wasn't right. My light beam traveled up the walls. They were insulated. I saw the glint of a modern climate control unit, its LED display glowing faintly in the dark. My confusion grew. This was no abandoned warehouse. Then my light fell upon them. In the center of the vast space, arranged with geometric precision, were three large, hulking shapes. Each one was completely hidden under a taut, form-fitting white car cover. They were silent and still, like great sleeping beasts. My heart, which had been a leaden weight in my chest, began to hammer against my ribs. A wild, impossible thought flickered in my mind. No, it couldn't be. Richard was a practical man, a man of stocks and bonds. He wasn't a collector. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The sheer size of them was imposing. This wasn't a place for junk. This was a showroom. A sanctuary. I reached the shape closest to me. The cover was thick and soft like flannel. I could feel the hard, curved lines of the vehicle beneath it. My breath caught in my throat. I had to know. With a trembling hand, I found the edge of the cover near what felt like the front of the car. I gripped the material. It was now or never. I pulled. The cover slid away with a soft whisper of fabric. My phone's light fell upon a surface so deep, so lustrous, it seemed to swallow the light itself. A perfect, mirror-like expanse of electric blue paint. My light traveled up over a long, powerful hood, a chrome-rimmed grille, and a single iconic silver Cobra emblem. It was a Shelby Cobra, a 1966 427, in flawless showroom condition. I dropped the cover and stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. I knew a little about cars from Richard's magazines. Car like this, it wasn't just a car. It was a legend. It was worth, I didn't even know, fortune. My mind was reeling, refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. This single car was worth more than my son probably thought I was. And it was just one of three. My gaze snapped to the other two shrouded forms. My heart pounded with a frantic, terrifying excitement. If this was here, what in God's name was under the other two covers? My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone steady. I stumbled toward the second covered shape, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief and adrenaline. It felt like a dream, like I had stepped through a door into another reality. I yanked the second cover off, my movements clumsy and urgent. This time the light revealed a flash of brilliant, fiery red. It was a 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, with its iconic split rear window. The chrome gleamed, the paint was flawless. It looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line yesterday. I didn't even pause. I scrambled to the third and final shape, my heart thudding in my ears like a drum solo. I tore the cover away. Underneath sat a beast of a car, all muscle and menace, painted in a deep glossy black. A 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. I stood in the middle of the garage, slowly turning in a circle, the beam of my phone dancing over three of the most beautiful, iconic, and valuable American muscle cars ever made. The silence in the garage was immense, broken only by my own ragged breathing. "Richard," I whispered into the stillness. "What did you do?" It was then that I noticed the other details of the room. This wasn't just a garage. It was a professional-grade, climate-controlled vault. There were dehumidifiers humming quietly in the corners, a sophisticated-looking security panel by the main door, and a row of battery tenders neatly connected to each car. This was a secret, meticulously planned operation. My eyes scanned the walls, searching for an explanation for anything. And then I saw it. Taped to the wall next to a light switch I hadn't noticed before was a simple white envelope. My name, Evelyn, was written on the front in Richard's familiar, steady hand. With trembling fingers, I flicked the light switch. The garage was instantly flooded with bright, clean light from overhead fluorescent fixtures. The cars exploded into color, their polished surfaces reflecting the lights like jewels. The sight was so overwhelming it literally took my breath away. I pulled the envelope from the wall and walked over to a leather armchair I now saw tucked into a corner, next to a small desk. I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly feeling weak, and tore open the seal. Inside was a letter several pages long, all in his handwriting. It began, "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found my last gift to you. I know you must be feeling shocked, confused, and probably a little angry with me. Please forgive me for the secrecy. It was never meant to hurt you. It was meant to protect you." I had to stop and take a deep breath, my eyes blurring with tears. Protect me? From what? About 6 years ago, the letter continued, the doctors gave me my diagnosis. Congestive heart failure. They gave me 5 years tops. I beat them by a year, my love, but I knew my time was limited. I knew I had to make sure you would be okay long after I was gone. This was the first I was hearing of this. He had told me his heart was a little weak. He had downplayed every symptom, every doctor's visit. He had carried this terrible burden alone. I felt a fresh wave of grief, but it was now mixed with a profound, aching love for his quiet strength. I had to pause, pressing the letter to my chest, just to feel close to him for a moment. This story wasn't just about a garage anymore. It was about the man I'd been married to for 45 years. I took another breath and forced myself to read on. I knew the next part would explain everything. I know you must be wondering about the inheritance, about the will. Why I would leave our home to Ethan and this garage to you. Believe me, that decision cost me more sleepless nights than my failing health ever did. Over the last decade, I watched our son change. Evelyn, the ambitious boy we raised, became something different. Harder. More calculating. He started to see people, including you, in terms of their value to him. A tear dripped onto the page, smudging the ink. He had seen it. I had made excuses for Ethan's behavior for years. He's stressed, he's busy, it's just how business is. But Richard had seen the truth. I saw how he spoke to you when he thought I wasn't listening. I saw how he dismissed your opinions. I was terrified that if I left you our assets openly, he would find a way to control them. He would manage your inheritance for you for your own good, until there was nothing left. I could not and would not let that happen. So I devised this plan. I gave him what he values, the visible high-status symbols. The penthouse, the flashy portfolio. Things he could boast about. But what is in this garage, my love, is the real wealth. These 3 cars alone are conservatively valued at over $10 million. I gasped. The number was so large, so astronomical, it didn't feel real. $10 million. I looked from the letter to the 3 gleaming machines standing silent guard in the room. But the cars, Richard's letter concluded, with a sentence that made the hair on my arm stand up, are just the beginning. The real security, the real future I built for you, is hidden behind our photograph from Cape Cod. The combination to the safe is our anniversary. Oh, my love, forever. Richard. My head was spinning. The cars were just the beginning? I stumbled over to the small desk against the wall. And there it was. A framed photo of Richard and me on the beach in Cape Cod, taken on our 35th anniversary. We were laughing, the wind whipping my hair across my face, the ocean stretching out behind us. It had always been one of my favorite pictures. I had thought it was lost in one of our moves years ago, but he had kept it here. With trembling hands, I lifted the frame from the desk. Just as he'd said, the wall behind it was different. A faint square outline revealed the door of a flush-mounted safe. The keypad glowed softly as my fingers hovered over it. Our anniversary. October 15th. 10 to 15. I punched in the numbers. The safe beeped softly and a quiet click echoed in the garage. I pulled the heavy steel door open. It wasn't filled with cash or jewelry. It was filled with documents. Neatly organized folders, binders, and a series of labeled USB drives. I pulled out the top folder. The label on it read in Richard's block printing, "Complete asset inventory for Evelyn Reed." My legs gave out. I slid down the wall to sit on the cool, polished floor, the folder in my lap. I opened it. The first page was a summary. My eyes scanned columns of numbers and descriptions that made no sense. Apartment buildings in Boston. A commercial retail property in Chicago's Magnificent Mile. A small, profitable vineyard in Napa Valley I never knew he'd even visited. And then there were the investment portfolios. Not the main one he'd given to Ethan, but separate private accounts with different firms. Accounts filled with blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and other investments I didn't understand. At the bottom of the page was a grand total. A number so large, so impossible that I had to read it 3 times. It was more money than I could possibly imagine. More than Ethan had received. Many, many times more. I just sat there on the floor, surrounded by the proof of my husband's secret life. This wasn't just financial planning. This was a masterpiece of stealth and foresight. For 6 years, while I thought he was simply winding down his career, he had been a ghost, moving assets, making acquisitions, building an untouchable fortress to protect me after he was gone. I flipped through the pages, my mind numb. Deeds, stock certificates, bank statements. It was all in my name, held in a series of trusts that had been legally triggered upon his death, transferring everything to me seamlessly and privately. Mr. Davies, the lawyer, must have known. That look he'd given me, it wasn't pity. It was a silent message: trust the process. Trust Richard. I finally managed to get to my feet and explore the rest of the small office space. Tucked away was a door I hadn't seen. I opened it. Inside was a small, perfectly clean bathroom with a shower. Next to it was a kitchenette with a mini fridge. I opened it. It was stocked with bottled water, juice, and simple food: cheese, crackers, yogurt. In a small closet, I found several sets of new clothes, all in my size with the tag still on. Casual slacks, comfortable sweaters, a simple, elegant dress. The thoroughness of his planning, the depth of his care, broke through my shock and brought fresh tears to my eyes. He had known somehow that I might be cast out. He had anticipated that I would have nowhere to go. He had prepared this place not just as a vault for his assets, but as a sanctuary for me. A safe harbor. I spent that first night on the leather armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket I found in the closet. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the quiet, brightly lit garage, watching over the 3 beautiful cars, with the open safe at my feet. The world outside, the cold rain, the son who had betrayed me, the home that was no longer mine. It all felt a million miles away. In this strange secret garage, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's fierce, protective love, I wasn't a useless old woman. I wasn't a burden. I was the sole heir to a hidden empire. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through a small, high window I hadn't noticed, I found Richard's letter again. Tucked into the last page was a business card. It read, Arthur Vance, Private Asset Management. By appointment only. Below the name, Richard had written a short note. Artie will help you with whatever you need. He is the only one besides me who knows everything. You can trust him with your life. My hand closed around the card. It was time to stop being a victim. It was time to find out what came next. And more importantly, it was time to figure out exactly what I was going to do about my son, Ethan. I made the call that morning. A calm, professional voice answered on the first ring. Vance. Hello, I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. My name is Evelyn Reed. My husband, Richard Reed, suggested I call you. There was a brief pause. Evelyn, the voice said, and it was suddenly filled with warmth. I've been expecting your call. My deepest condolences for your loss. Richard was a great man. And a very good friend. 2 hours later, Arthur Vance walked into the garage. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that were both kind and incredibly sharp. He took in the scene, the cars, the open safe, me sitting in the leather armchair, and nodded slowly. He did well, Arthur said, more to himself than to me. He actually pulled it off. We spent the next several hours going over everything. Arthur, or Artie as he insisted I call him, patiently explained the structure of the trusts, the performance of the portfolios, and the income generated by the rental properties. He explained that Richard had set it up so that I would have a significant, steady income for the rest of my life, without ever having to touch the principal assets. He wanted you to be free, Evelyn, Artie told me, his gaze direct. Free from worry, free from need, and free from any form of control. I finally understood the full scope of Richard's brilliance. He hadn't just left me money, he had left me independence. I spent the next few days in my secret sanctuary, with Artie helping me get my bearings. We set up new bank accounts, transferred utilities, and I signed a mountain of paperwork that officially put me in control of my new life. One document in particular made my heart skip a beat. It was the deed to a fully furnished house in a quiet, historic neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia. A city Richard and I had visited on our 25th anniversary, and had always dreamed of retiring to. He had bought it for me 2 years ago. It was on the 3rd day that my phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Ethan. My stomach twisted into a knot, a reflex born of years of catering to his moods. But then I looked around the garage at the gleaming cars, at the proof of my own strength. The knot loosened. I answered. Mom? Where are you? He asked, his voice laced with annoyance, not concern. Aunt Carol is worried sick. I'm fine, Ethan, I replied, my voice calm and even. I found a place to stay. Good, he said dismissively. Listen, I need you to come by the Penthouse tomorrow and get the rest of your things. The decorators are coming, and Tiffany wants all your old stuff out of the way before they start. Old stuff. He meant the family photos, Richard's books, my mother's china, the fragments of our lives. I felt a flash of the old hurt, but I pushed it down. I see, I said. What time would be convenient for you? Morning. Before 10. I have meetings. Click. He hung up. This was it. My first test. The next morning I didn't wear the old, sensible clothes of Evelyn Reed, the widow. I wore one of the outfits Richard had left for me, a pair of elegant cream-colored trousers and a cashmere sweater in a beautiful shade of blue. I had my hair done at a salon near the garage. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who was just getting started. I arrived at the Penthouse at 9:45 a.m. Ethan opened the door, already looking impatient. But he stopped short when he saw me. He blinked, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I wasn't the weeping, broken woman he had thrown out into the rain. Tiffany glided into the foyer, a measuring tape draped around her neck. "Oh, look who it is," she sneered, her eyes raking over my new clothes. "Find a place under a bridge with good Wi-Fi, Evelyn?" I gave her a small, serene smile. "Something like that," I said, walking past her into the living room. Boxes were everywhere. My life taped up and ready for disposal. "I found a place that is surprisingly comfortable. I'm just here for the things that belong to me." I calmly went from room to room collecting the items I wanted, the photo albums, Richard's favorite reading lamp, the small painting of the sea we'd bought on our honeymoon. I worked efficiently, ignoring Ethan's impatient sighing and Tiffany's whispered comments. As I was packing a box of Richard's old journals, one of them fell open. His handwriting filled the page. It was an entry from about a year ago. "Spoke to Ethan today about his new venture. Over-leveraged, far too much risk. He's blinded by the potential payout. His ambition, if not tempered with wisdom, will be his ruin. I fear he will have to learn the hard way." I felt a chill. Richard hadn't just predicted Ethan's behavior towards me. He'd predicted his son's entire downfall. When I was done, I had 5 boxes. The doorman helped me take them down to my car. As I was about to leave, I turned to my son. "You know, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "your father was a very wise man. He had an incredible ability to see things that other people missed, to see the true value in things." I let the words hang in the air, watching the confusion on his face. He thought I was talking about him. He had no idea I was talking about a rusty old garage in Queens. I got in my car and drove away, not aimlessly this time but south. Towards the sun, towards the coast, towards the new home that was waiting for me. And I didn't look back once. The next 3 months were like stepping into a different life. The house in Savannah was a dream. A charming 2-story home with a wide front porch and a garden filled with azaleas. Richard had furnished it with pieces that were so perfectly me. I felt like I'd lived there forever. I met my next-door neighbor, a warm, witty widow named Margaret, who, as it turned out, had been secretly enlisted by Richard years ago. He told me a dear friend of his would be moving in eventually, she confessed over iced tea on my porch. "He just asked me to be ready to welcome you." He was quite a man, your Richard. I was settling in, finding a peaceful rhythm for the first time since Richard's passing. I was learning to manage my assets with Artie's guidance, discovering I had a surprisingly good head for it. I was starting to feel like myself again. Or rather, a new, stronger version of myself. But the peace was not to last. One sunny afternoon, a certified letter arrived. The return address was the New York City Department of Buildings. My hands grew cold as I opened it. It was a formal notice. A petition had been filed by Mr. Ethan Reed to have the property at 1420 Industrial Avenue declared derelict and abandoned. The petition argued the building was an eyesore and a potential hazard, and requested the city seize the property for demolition and redevelopment. I had to read it twice. He was trying to take the garage from me. He didn't know what was inside, of course. To him, it was just a worthless building on a potentially valuable piece of land. He was so consumed by greed that he was trying to steal the one pathetic thing he thought his father had left me. The sheer, bottomless avarice of it left me breathless. It was no longer about neglect. This was an active, malicious attack. I sat on my beautiful sun-drenched porch and felt a rage so pure and cold it was almost calming. The game had just changed. This was no longer just about protecting myself. This was about honoring Richard's last wishes. I immediately called Artie and my new lawyer. "We are going to fight this," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "And we are going to win." But as it turned out, I wouldn't have to. The universe, it seems, had its own plans for my son. Just a few weeks later, as my legal team was preparing our response, I was pruning my roses when an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway. A young woman in a severe business suit got out, looking flustered and out of place in the sleepy Savannah neighborhood. "Mrs. Reed?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Clara Mendoza. I'm Mr. Reed's executive assistant." I invited her inside, a sense of foreboding settling over me. She sat on the edge of my sofa, refusing my offer of a drink. "I'm here without Mr. Reed's knowledge," she began, wringing her hands. "But I felt you had a right to know. Mrs. Reed, Ethan is in serious trouble." She opened a slim folder and laid out the disaster. It was worse than even Richard could have predicted. The costs for the penthouse renovation had spiraled out of control. Apparently, Tiffany had insisted on Italian marble that had to be custom ordered and a German kitchen system that required the entire floor to be replumbed. The contractors hadn't been paid in 2 months and had walked off the job, placing liens on the property. But that was only the beginning. The big real estate project Ethan had poured all his capital into, a luxury condo development in Brooklyn, had collapsed. A last-minute environmental survey discovered the land was contaminated, a fact the seller had conveniently failed to disclose. The cleanup costs were astronomical, making the project unviable. The investors had pulled out, suing Ethan for their money. "He's leveraged everything," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "The penthouse, his other properties. He took out massive loans based on the projected value of the condo project. He's facing total financial ruin, Mrs. Reed. He's going to lose everything." I just sat there taking it all in. Richard's prediction from his journal echoed in my mind. His ambition, if not tempered with wisdom, will be his ruin. "Why are you telling me this, Clara?" I asked quietly. Her eyes filled with tears. "Because he's desperate. And he started looking at his father's estate again, trying to find anything that might have been missed. He's obsessed with the idea that there are hidden accounts. He's the one who told me to file the petition for the garage." She took a shaky breath. "He needs a bailout. And he knows you inherited something. He doesn't know what, but he's planning to come to you. I thought you should be prepared." I looked at the young woman, who had clearly risked her job to give me this warning. I felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Clara," I said. "You've done the right thing." After she left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the sun set over the oak trees. Karma was a funny thing. My son, who had cast me out with nothing, was now about to have nothing himself. And I, the useless old woman with the trashy garage, was the only person in the world who could save him. The question was, should I? I needed to see the damage for myself. I booked a flight to New York for the next morning. The doorman at 740 Park Avenue looked shocked to see Maine. I guess he thought he'd seen the last of me 3 months ago. I gave him a polite nod and took the private elevator up to the penthouse. The doors opened not to the elegant home I remembered, but to a scene of utter chaos. The beautiful marble foyer was gone, replaced by a dusty concrete subfloor. Wires and pipes snaked out of gaping holes in the walls. The grand living room where Richard and I had hosted so many happy gatherings was a skeleton of metal studs and plastic sheeting. The air hung thick with the dead smell of an abandoned construction site. It was a perfect metaphor for my son's life. A hollowed-out shell demolished from the inside out. I walked through the wreckage of my former home, a strange mix of sadness and vindication washing over me. I felt a pang of loss for the memories we'd made here, but I also felt a grim satisfaction. This destruction was the physical manifestation of Ethan's greed and arrogance. I heard the elevator doors open again. "Mom!" It was Ethan's voice, but it sounded different. Thinner. Brittle. I turned to face him. The change in him was staggering. The impeccable, confident executive was gone. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights. He had lost weight, and it made the sharp angles of his face stand out, making him look older, harder, and strangely more vulnerable. For the first time, I saw not just Richard's handsome features in his face, but Richard's exhaustion during his final months. "Clara called me," he said, his voice raspy. "She told me she went to see you. I'm going to fire her for that." "You'll do no such thing," I said, my voice firm and steady. "That young woman showed more loyalty and integrity in one afternoon than you have in the last year. If anything, you should give her a raise, though I doubt you can afford it." He flinched but didn't argue. He just gestured vaguely at the surrounding chaos. So, he said, trying for a sarcastic tone that fell flat, what do you think of the renovations? I think, I said, looking him straight in the eye, that it looks exactly like your life. That broke him. He stumbled over to an overturned paint bucket and sank onto it, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. It wasn't loud, dramatic sobbing, but a quiet, desperate, and utterly defeated sound. I didn't go to him. I didn't comfort him. I just stood there and waited. This was something he had to face on his own. After a long moment he looked up, his eyes red. It's all gone, Mom, he whispered. Everything. The project went under. The banks are calling in the loans. The contractors have put liens on this place. Tiffany packed her bags last week. She said she didn't sign up to be married to a failure. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Isn't that ironic? The woman who pushed me to spend every last dime on this place, to take bigger and bigger risks, was the first one to bail when the ship started sinking. I remained silent, letting him talk. He needed to say it all out loud. I was so arrogant, he continued, staring at the exposed wiring on the ceiling. I thought I was smarter than Dad. He used to warn me about being over-leveraged, about chasing flashy deals. I thought he was old-fashioned, timid. I thought I knew better. He finally looked at me, a raw, pleading expression on his face. He knew this would happen, didn't he? That's why he did what he did with the will. Your father knew your character, Ethan, I said softly. He hoped you would prove him wrong. We stood in silence for another minute, the sounds of the city far below filtering up through the empty window frames. The power dynamic between us had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the needy mother, and he was no longer the powerful son. He finally got to his feet and faced me, swallowing his pride. It seemed to cost him everything. Mom, he said, his voice cracking. I need help. I know you have something. Dad wouldn't have left you with nothing. I don't know what it is, but I'm begging you. Will you help me? I looked at my son, this broken man standing in the ruins of his ambition. The part of me that was his mother wanted to rush forward and hold him. But the part of me that was Richard's wife, the woman who had been called useless and thrown into the street, held me back. Help was not the same as a handout. A rescue was not the same as a reward. I will help you, Ethan, I said slowly, my voice ringing with a new authority in the cavernous, empty room. But it will not be on your terms. It will be on mine. And my terms are not negotiable. His eyes widened, a flicker of hope warring with a new sense of dread. And my first condition, I said, letting the words land with the weight of cold, hard steel, is this: you will never see or speak to Tiffany again. You will file for divorce immediately. Her influence in your life is over. Permanently. Ethan stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He had expected me to write a check. He had expected tears, lectures, maybe even an "I told you so." He had not expected an ultimatum that would dismantle his entire personal life. Tiffany, he stammered. What does my divorce have to do with this? It has everything to do with this, I said, my voice as calm and unyielding as a river stone. That woman is a parasite, Ethan. She encouraged your worst instincts. Your greed, your arrogance, your cruelty. She applauded when you threw me out of my home. She is a symptom of the disease that has rotted your life from the inside out. To get my help, you must first prove you are willing to cut out the cancer. No, Tiffany. That is the first step. Take it or leave it. He looked around the demolished penthouse, at the tangible evidence of his failure. He looked at me, at the woman he had dismissed, who now held all the cards. The fight went out of his eyes, replaced by a weary resignation. Okay, he whispered. Okay, Mom. She's gone. Good, I said without a flicker of triumph. This wasn't about winning. It was about rebuilding. Now for the rest of it. Be at my house in Savannah tomorrow at noon. Come alone. We will discuss the full terms then. I turned and walked toward the elevator without a backward glance. The next day, precisely at noon, Ethan pulled up to my charming Savannah home. He looked even worse in the bright southern sunlight. He walked up to my porch like a man walking to his own sentencing. I had set up 2 chairs in the garden, with a pitcher of iced tea between us. This would not be a negotiation. It would be a presentation. "Sit down, Ethan," I said. He sat. For the next hour I laid out my plan. I spoke calmly, clearly, and without emotion. "First," I began, "as of this moment, I am taking control of your financial disaster. You will give me full transparency. I want to see every debt, every contract, every angry letter from a creditor. You will hide nothing. My financial advisor, Mr. Vance, will conduct a full audit." He nodded, his face pale. "Second," I continued, "I will establish a trust. This trust will pay off your most critical debts to prevent bankruptcy and foreclosure. It will provide the funds to finish the penthouse renovation to a sensible standard, not Tiffany's fantasy palace, so it can be sold. The property will be sold, Ethan. You will not live there again." He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. "You lost the privilege of living in that home. The proceeds from the sale will go back into the trust. From that trust," I went on, "you will be given a monthly stipend. It will be enough to cover a modest apartment, food, and basic necessities. It will not be enough for designer suits or fancy restaurants. You will live on a budget, and the trust will monitor every penny for the next 5 years. You will learn the value of $1. His jaw tightened. "So I'm on an allowance? Like a child? You're being treated like a man who has proven he cannot manage his own finances." I corrected him gently. "This is not a punishment. It is a protective measure. Third, you will work. You are not going back to high-stakes real estate. You are too impulsive. I have spoken to a friend of your father's who runs a non-profit organization that builds affordable housing. They need someone with your development experience. The salary is a fraction of what you're used to, but your stipend will supplement it. You will use your skills to help people, not just to enrich yourself." He stared at me dumbfounded. "And finally," I said, my voice softening slightly, "the most important condition. You will get help. You will attend therapy twice a week with a doctor of my choosing. You need to understand the roots of your arrogance, your anger, and your disrespect. And you will begin the process of making amends. Not just to me, but to the memory of your father, whose trust you betrayed." I finished and took a sip of my iced tea, letting the silence stretch. I had laid out a new life for him. A life of humility, responsibility, and purpose. It was a prison of sorts, but it was also a lifeline. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on the garden. I could see the war inside him. His pride fighting against his desperation. His old self fighting against the chance for a new one. I didn't rush him. The choice had to be his. Finally, he looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger or arrogance or fear. It was a flicker of something broken. Something that was finally ready to be mended. His shoulders slumped. He let out a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry all the fight out of him. "I'll do it," he whispered, his voice hoarse with unshed tears. "I'll do it all." The 6 months that followed were the hardest of Ethan's life, and in many ways they were transformative for us both. The divorce from Tiffany was swift and ugly. She fought for every penny, but with Ethan's assets frozen and controlled by the trust, there was little for her to take. Her lawyers soon realized they were battling a financial fortress managed by Artie Vance, and they quickly settled. Her chapter in our lives was slammed shut. The penthouse, once a symbol of Ethan's ambition, became his first major project in humility. Under the strict supervision of a no-nonsense project manager hired by Artie, the renovations were completed, tastefully, sensibly, and on budget. When it was sold, the profits were enough to clear all of Ethan's outstanding business debts and establish a healthy principle for the trust. He was officially solvent, but he was not rich. His financial freedom was still 5 years away. He moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood in Brooklyn. I know he hated it at first. He, who was used to doormen and sweeping city views, now had to deal with noisy neighbors and street parking. His new job at the affordable housing nonprofit was a shock to his system. He wasn't the boss. He was part of a team. His colleagues were not slick Wall Street types, but passionate, overworked idealists who cared more about community than commissions. He was initially resentful and condescending, but the work itself began to change him. He was good at it. He knew how to navigate city permits, how to manage contractors, how to bring a project in on budget. For the first time, he saw a building go up not as a monument to his own ego, but as a home for families who desperately needed one. Our phone calls changed. At first, they were stilted and formal, mostly about the trust and his budget. But gradually, he started to talk about his work. He'd tell me about a single mother who cried with joy when she got the keys to her new apartment, or about a tricky zoning issue he'd managed to solve. I could hear a new note in his voice, not pride in the old arrogant sense, but a quiet satisfaction. The therapy was the hardest part. Dr. Miller, the therapist I'd chosen, was a kind but firm woman who did not let him off the hook. He admitted to me months later that for the first 2 months, he had lied and deflected, blaming everyone but himself. But she was patient, and eventually, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble. He started to confront the deep-seated insecurity that had fueled his relentless drive for more, the jealousy he'd always felt toward his father's quiet confidence, and the casual misogyny that had allowed him to dismiss me so easily. One afternoon in early spring, a package arrived for me. It was from Ethan. Inside there was no gift, just a thick handwritten letter. I sat in my garden to read it, my heart beating a little faster. It was not an apology coerced by a therapist. It was a confession. It was a reckoning. He wrote, "Mom, I'm writing this because I know I haven't been able to say it properly on the phone. I am sorry. Those are easy words to write, but I want you to know what I'm sorry for. I'm sorry for the words I said to you that night. They were cruel and unforgivable. But I'm more sorry that I actually believed them. For years, I let my own arrogance and Tiffany's influence convince me that you were somehow less than, that because you weren't in the business world, you didn't understand things. It was a convenient lie that let me feel superior." He continued, "I spent my whole life trying to outrun Dad's shadow, trying to build something bigger and flashier. I thought that's what success was. All I ended up building was a house of cards. Dad built his life on a foundation of stone, on integrity, wisdom, and love for you. I see that now. This new job, seeing families get a safe place to live. It's the first time I've ever built something that feels real. Something that feels like it has a solid foundation." The last paragraph made me put the letter down and wipe my eyes. "I know I broke your trust and Dad's. I don't expect you to forgive me, not now, maybe not ever. But I hope that one day, you might be able to look at the man I am trying to become and not be ashamed. That is the new goal I am working toward. That is my new promotion." I folded the letter and held it to my chest. The words were more valuable than any check he could have written. It was the first time since Richard died that I felt a true glimmer of hope for my son. The wounds were deep, but for the first time it felt like they might actually begin to heal. Perhaps Richard's plan hadn't just been about saving me from Ethan. Perhaps it had also been about saving Ethan from himself. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, it felt like we were finally walking in the same direction. Ethan called me a week before Thanksgiving. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant. "I was wondering if it's okay. I'd like to drive down and spend the holiday with you." It was the first time he had invited himself over. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. "I'd like that very much, Ethan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He arrived the Wednesday before the holiday. The change was remarkable. He was still my son, but the hard, frantic energy around him was gone, replaced by a quiet calm. He had a few gray hairs at his temples, and lines of humility around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked at peace. He brought a pumpkin pie from a famous bakery in Brooklyn and a bouquet of autumn flowers. We spent the afternoon talking comfortably, easily, in a way we hadn't in over a decade. He told me more about his work, about the families he was helping. I told him about my new friends in Savannah, my gardening club, the trips Artie was helping me plan. That evening, after we had finished dinner, he cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, I have something for you," he said. He retrieved his briefcase from the hall and brought back a small, cloth-wrapped parcel. He placed it carefully on the coffee table in front of me. "When we were clearing out the penthouse for the sale," he explained, "we had to empty Dad's old office safe. I found these inside. I should have given them to you sooner, but I guess I wasn't ready." I carefully unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small wooden box that I recognized instantly. It was Richard's box of cufflinks and tie pins. But that wasn't what made my breath catch. Sitting nestled in the velvet lining was my original wedding band. The simple gold ring I had worn for 45 years. In the chaos of being thrown out, I thought it had been lost forever. "Oh, Ethan," I whispered, tears springing to my eyes as I slid the familiar, worn ring onto my finger. Felt like coming home. "There's something else," he said softly. He reached into the box and pulled out a small flat jeweler's box, the kind that holds a ring. It was from Tiffany & Company. It looked brand new. "Dad bought this about a month before he passed away," Ethan said, his own voice thick with emotion. He pushed the box across the table to me. "The receipt was with it. It was for your 45th anniversary. He never got the chance to give it to you." My hand trembled as I opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, was the most beautiful ring I had ever seen. It was an eternity band, a continuous circle of sparkling diamonds and deep blue sapphires, my birthstone. It was elegant, timeless, and so exquisitely my style it was as if I had picked it out myself. "Oh, Richard," I breathed, lifting the ring from the box. The stones caught the light of the lamp, scattering tiny rainbows across the room. He had been planning for a future he knew he wouldn't be in. Even at the very end, he was thinking of me, of our anniversaries yet to come. I slid the new ring onto my finger, right next to my old wedding band, the simple, solid gold of our beginning, and the brilliant, sparkling circle of a lifetime together. They belonged together. Ethan watched me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He wasn't just giving me a gift, he was acting as his father's proxy, completing a final act of love. He was bridging the gap between the past and the present, between the husband I had lost and the son I was finding again. We sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a moment of profound peace, of healing. The ghosts of the last year finally seemed to be receding. Finally, Ethan looked up, a real genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. "It looks beautiful on you, Mom," he said. He then looked at my hands, at the two rings shining there. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. "You know," he said, his curiosity finally getting the better of him, "I've been wondering this whole time. The cars, the ones in that garage Dad left you, what did you end up doing with them?" I smiled, a real deep smile that came from the heart. I had been waiting for him to ask that question, and I finally knew the perfect answer. I let the question hang in the air for a moment, savoring it. A year ago, that question would have been loaded with accusation and envy. Now it was just curious. It was a son asking his mother about her life. "Well," I began, leaning back in my chair. "The Corvette and the Mustang were beautiful, but they were also a lot of car for a woman in her late 60s. Ethan chuckled. "That's an understatement. I spoke with Artie," I continued, "and we arranged for them to be sold at a major classic car auction. The collectors went absolutely wild. They sold for even more than Richard had estimated." I watched Ethan's face. There wasn't a flicker of greed, only genuine interest. He was happy for me. That, right there, was the proof of how far he had come. "That's incredible, Mom. What are you going to do with all that?" "I divided the proceeds into two main funds," I explained. "The first is a foundation I've established in your father's name. It's called the Richard Reed Foundation for Financial Literacy. It will partner with community colleges and nonprofits to provide free workshops for young people, teaching them about responsible investing, the dangers of debt, and how to build wealth slowly and smartly. Your father believed that financial wisdom was a form of freedom." Ethan's eyes widened. He was quiet for a moment, processing the idea. A foundation to prevent others from making the very mistakes he had made. It was a legacy that was both a tribute and a lesson. That's perfect, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He would have loved that. "And the second fund?" he asked. I looked at him, my expression softening. "The second one is a trust fund. It's for my future grandchildren." I let that sink in. "If and when you find a good woman and decide to build a life on a solid foundation this time, your children will have their college education completely paid for." That was something your father always valued. The hope I was offering him, the belief that he could have a future, a family, was a greater gift than any amount of money. He simply nodded, unable to speak. "So, he finally managed to ask, a grin spreading across his face. Does that mean you sold all of them? What about the cobra? I returned his grin with a mischievous twinkle in my eye. Oh, the cobra? I kept that one. I decided a useless old woman deserved to have a little fun. The last scene of my story doesn't take place in a lawyer's office or a broken-down penthouse. It takes place a few months later, on a beautiful, sunny afternoon on the coastal highway just outside of Savannah. I'm behind the wheel of the 1966 Shelby Cobra. The top is down, and the roar of the massive V8 engine is like thunder. The wind whips through my hair, and the sun is warm on my face. I push the accelerator, and the car leaps forward, pressing me back into the leather seat. I feel powerful, feel free, feel alive. I realize now what Richard's true inheritance was. It wasn't the money, the cars, or the properties. That was just the means to an end. His real gift was his wisdom. He knew that our family, comfortable and complacent, had begun to rot from the inside. He knew Ethan needed to be broken down completely before he could ever be built back up. He knew I needed to be pushed out of the nest, out of my comfortable life as a wife and mother, to discover the strong, capable woman I had forgotten I was. The will wasn't an act of betrayal. It was an act of radical, painful, and ultimately life-saving love. He gave Ethan a harsh but necessary lesson, and he gave me a second chance at life, a chance to be the hero of my own story. As I round a curve, the setting sun glints off the ocean, turning the water into liquid gold. My hands are steady on the wheel. On my left hand, Richard's simple gold band sits beside the sparkling eternity ring. They are a reminder of a beautiful past, and a promise of a future I will build for myself. I am 68 years old. I am a daughter, a wife, a mother. But today, driving down this open road with the whole world ahead of me, I am simply Evelyn. And my journey is just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been a long and difficult year, but one that has taught me so much about love, loss, and the incredible strength we all have inside of us. I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever had a moment in your life that felt like an ending, only to discover it was actually a new beginning? Please share your experience in the comments below. I would truly love to read them. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more stories. You never know whose life you might touch.